My name is Stanley Mercer. I'm 71 years old, and 2 weeks after my son-in-law sold my late daughter's wedding ring, the very ring she begged me to keep safe for her children before she died, I learned he'd used that money to send his mistress on a luxury trip to Cancun. Let that sink in for a moment. A dying woman's final wish turned into piña coladas on a white sand beach for a woman my daughter never even knew existed. When I confronted him, he didn't flinch. He didn't look ashamed. He looked at me the way you look at an old dog that's finally stopped barking, and he laughed. He actually laughed, right in my face, in my own daughter's kitchen, standing on the same tile she used to dance on when she was a little girl. And he said she'd never know, as if the dead don't matter once they're buried, as if a promise made to a woman on her deathbed is just words that evaporate the second the casket closes. He thought I was just some tired old widower who'd shake his head, wipe his eyes, and let it go. He thought grief had made me weak. He thought 71 years old meant I didn't have any fight left in me. He was wrong. He was so wrong it's going to take him the rest of his life to understand exactly how wrong he was. So instead of crying, instead of begging, instead of doing what he expected me to do, which was nothing, I spent the next 2 weeks tracking that ring. I went through pawnshop records. I walked into jewelry stores with my daughter's photograph in my coat pocket. I chased down serial numbers, appraisal documents, insurance papers I hadn't looked at in 3 years. I followed a trail of lies so thick I could barely see through it. And at the end of that trail, there was a single piece of paper. A receipt. A pawnshop receipt with his signature on it, in his own handwriting, admitting exactly what he'd done and exactly when he'd done it. And when I finally laid that receipt down on the dining room table, in front of the whole family, during what was supposed to be a quiet Sunday dinner, the room went dead silent. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. And then my phone started ringing, 97 missed calls, in one night, from people who, 24 hours earlier, wouldn't have believed a word I said against him. But before I tell you how one piece of paper tore down every single lie that man had spent years building, I need to take you back to where this all started, because you won't understand the weight of what he did unless you understand what that ring actually meant. If you're the kind of person who believes family should be sacred, who believes a promise to someone you love should mean something even after they're gone, then stay with me. This is a story about betrayal, but it's also a story about what happens when you underestimate a grieving old man who still has one thing left to fight for. If you enjoy stories about betrayal, family secrets, justice, and ordinary people finally standing up for themselves, you're in the right place. Please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I taught high school history for 34 years. Every single day of those 34 years, I stood in front of teenagers and told them the same thing. History doesn't disappear just because people stop talking about it. It waits. It sits there in the record, in the documents, in the paper trail, until somebody finally goes looking for the truth. I used to tell my students that lies have a shelf life, but the truth is patient. The truth can wait 100 years if it has to. I never imagined I'd have to prove that lesson to my own family. I retired at 65. My wife, Dory's, passed 6 years before that. Cancer, quick and cruel the way it sometimes is, though at the time it didn't feel quick at all. It felt like watching a candle burn down over the course of a year, knowing exactly how much wax was left and being powerless to stop the flame. After she died, I sold the big house we raised our daughter in and moved into something smaller, something quieter, something that didn't have all those empty rooms staring back at me every morning. I live alone now, in a house with a workshop out back where I do woodworking. It's the only thing that quiets my hands when my mind won't stop. I've built cribs, bookshelves, rocking chairs, and a hope chest for my daughter's wedding that she cried over when she opened it. I've got sawdust in my blood at this point, and honestly, some days it's the only thing that keeps me from sitting in a dark room thinking about everyone I've lost. Because I have lost people. I lost my wife. And 3 years ago, I lost my daughter. Her name was Grace. She was 34 years old when the cancer took her, the same disease that took her mother, which felt like some kind of cruel cosmic joke, like the universe had decided our family owed a debt it couldn't stop collecting. Grace was my only child, my whole world if I'm being honest with you. She had her mother's laugh and my stubbornness, and together those two things made her impossible to argue with and impossible not to love. I was a devoted grandfather to her 2 children, a boy and a girl, Noah and Bella, 8 and 6 years old when their mother passed. I babysat them every week. I picked them up from school when their father was working late. I paid for Noah's baseball equipment and Bella's dance recital costumes when money got tight, because that's what grandfathers do. That's what family does. You don't keep score. You don't ask for anything back. You just show up every single time because the people you love are counting on you. I believed, still believe, even after everything, that family should always come first. That when someone you love is drowning, you don't stand on the shore and ask if they deserve to be saved. You just jump in. I want you to remember that about me as this story unfolds, because everything I did after discovering what happened to that ring came from that same belief. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was trying to protect the only thing my daughter asked me to protect. Now let me tell you about the man who married my daughter. His name was Trevor. When Grace first brought him home, I'll admit I liked him. He had a good handshake, looked me in the eye, laughed at my terrible jokes even when he clearly didn't find them funny. He seemed steady, employed, polite to his future mother-in-law, which mattered a great deal to Dory's, God rest her. He proposed to Grace in front of both families on Christmas Eve, and I remember thinking, watching my daughter cry with happiness in that living room, that I finally didn't have to worry about her anymore. I was wrong about that too. I seem to have been wrong about a great many things. After Grace passed, Trevor became, in the eyes of everyone around him, the picture of a grieving husband. He wore his wedding ring every day. He posted photographs of Grace on the anniversary of her death with captions about love lasting forever. He showed up to family gatherings looking tired and hollow, and everyone, myself included, rushed to comfort him, to tell him he was doing such a good job raising those children alone, that Grace would be so proud of him. I helped him. God help me, I helped him more than I've helped almost anyone in my life. I gave him money when the mortgage got tight. I paid Noah's school fees directly to the school so Trevor wouldn't have to worry about it. I babysat those children 3, sometimes 4 days a week so Trevor could work and clear his head and grieve properly. I trusted him with my daughter's memory. I trusted him with my daughter's children. I trusted him completely, without a single shred of doubt, because I believed grief made people honest. I believed a man who had lost his wife the way Trevor lost Grace couldn't possibly be capable of the kind of rot I would eventually uncover underneath all that performance. The extended family admired his devotion. My sister used to tell me at every holiday how lucky Grace had been to marry a man who loved her that much, even in death. Neighbors brought him casseroles. Church members prayed over him. Everyone saw a widower doing his best. Nobody saw the truth. Nobody except, eventually, me. And by the time I saw it, the rot had already spread so deep into that family that I don't think there was any saving it. I don't think there ever could have been. Because unknown to every single one of us, unknown to his own children, unknown to the family who brought him casseroles and prayed for his broken heart, Trevor was living a double life. And the ring my daughter loved more than anything else on this earth became the currency he used to pay for it. I need you to understand what that ring meant, because if you don't understand that, you won't understand why I couldn't let this go. You'll think I'm just a bitter old man who couldn't accept his son-in-law moving on. That is not what this is. This was never about Trevor moving on. Grieving people move on, and God knows I would never begrudge anyone their healing. This was about something else entirely. That ring wasn't bought off a shelf. Grace and I designed it together, back before she even met Trevor, back when she was 26 years old, and dreaming about the kind of wedding she wanted someday. We sat at my kitchen table with a sketch pad, and she drew what she wanted, and I told her about the family diamond, a stone that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in our family, starting with my own grandmother, who carried it across an ocean sewn into the lining of her coat because she was too afraid to lose it in her luggage. That diamond survived a world war. It survived poverty. It survived a house fire in 1962 that took nearly everything else my grandmother owned. That stone was practically a member of our family by the time it reached Grace's hand. We had it set into a ring exactly the way she wanted, and when Trevor proposed, I gave it to him privately beforehand and told him this ring carries more than 100 years of women in this family who loved fiercely and survived terrible things. I told him to take care of it. He shook my hand and told me he understood exactly what it meant. Grace wore that ring every single day of her marriage. I have photographs of her wearing it on her wedding day, laughing so hard she could barely hold her bouquet steady. I have photographs of her wearing it at Thanksgiving, at Noah's baptism, at Bella's first birthday, her hand resting on her pregnant belly with that diamond catching the light. That ring was in almost every important photograph of the last 8 years of my daughter's life. It wasn't jewelry, it was a witness. It watched her become a wife, a mother, and eventually, far too soon, it watched her become sick. Near the end, when the cancer had taken so much of her strength that she could barely lift her own hand, Grace took that ring off her finger and pressed it into mine. She held onto my hand with whatever strength she had left, and she looked at me with her mother's eyes, and she said, "Dad, if anything happens to me, promise you'll keep my ring for my Barbies one day." I promised her. I sat there in that hospital room with my daughter's hand in mine, and I made her a promise I intended to keep until the day I died. I told her Noah and Bella would have that ring, that diamond, that piece of history, when they were old enough to understand what it meant. I told her I would guard it like it was the last piece of her left on this earth, because in a lot of ways, it was. I remember the exact texture of that hospital room, the beeping of the monitor, steady and indifferent to what was happening in that bed. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the flowers my sister had brought that were already starting to wilt on the windowsill. Grace's hand, once so strong, she used to carry Noah on one hip and a bag of groceries on the other without breaking a sweat, had become so thin and light I was almost afraid to hold it too tightly, afraid I might hurt her, afraid I might break something that was already breaking on its own. She had asked me twice, actually, if I understood what she was asking. Not once, twice, as if she needed to hear me say it out loud to be sure the promise would hold. I told her, "Yes, Gracie, I understand. I promise." And she closed her eyes after that, not because she'd given up, but because I think some weight had finally lifted off her, some fear she'd been carrying quietly that her children might lose the last physical thread connecting them to her. I have never broken a promise to my daughter in her entire life. Not once, not even the small ones. Not the promise to teach her to ride a bike before she turned 6. Not the promise to walk her down the aisle even though her mother wasn't there to see it. Not the promise to be there every single day after the diagnosis, no matter how hard the days got. I was not about to let a man who never even understood the weight of what he was holding be the reason I broke the only promise that mattered more than any of the others. After the funeral, I took that ring home with me. I polished it by hand at my kitchen table, the same table where Grace and I once sketched it into existence. I locked it in a small fireproof safe in my closet, the same safe where I keep Dory's wedding ring, my father's old pocket watch, and the deed to this house. I told myself that the ring was safe there. I told myself I had kept my promise. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to understand that this ring wasn't an object to me. It was sacred. It was the physical proof that my daughter existed, that she loved, that she fought, and that she trusted her own father with the one thing she couldn't take with her when she died. Now I want you to imagine how it felt to open that safe and find it empty. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I found out. I'd gone to Trevor's house to drop off a birthday present for Bella, and while I was there, some instinct, call it a grandfather's intuition, call it 34 years of reading teenagers who were lying to me about their homework, made me ask about the ring. I wanted to see it. I hadn't seen it in a few months, not since I'd let Trevor borrow it from the safe to have it cleaned properly for an anniversary he wanted to mark with the children, some little ceremony he said he wanted to do at Grace's grave. I trusted him with it. I actually handed him the key to unlock that piece of my daughter's memory because he was her husband, and I believed grief had made him trustworthy. He didn't answer me right away. He busied himself with something at the kitchen counter, wouldn't look at me, and something cold settled into my stomach, the way it does right before you already know the bad news that's coming. I asked him again, "Where is Grace's ring, Trevor?" And without a shred of shame in his voice, without even turning around to look me in the eye, he said, "I sold it." I felt my whole body go still. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me, the way it does when something impossible has just become true. I asked him to repeat himself because some part of my brain refused to accept what I'd heard. He turned around then, and I want you to understand the expression on his face wasn't guilt. It wasn't even discomfort. It was irritation, like I was the one being unreasonable by asking. He shrugged his shoulders and said, "The kids don't need an old ring." An old ring. He called 100 years of family history, a mother's dying wish, an old ring. I stood there in that kitchen, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else, and I asked him how he could do that. How he could take something that wasn't his, something his dying wife had specifically entrusted to me for her children, and sell it like it was nothing more than scrap metal. And then he said the words that are seared into my memory forever. He looked at me, almost bored, and he said, besides, she'd never know. Never know my daughter, his dead wife, the mother of his children. Reduced to a woman who would never know because she was 6 feet in the ground and couldn't stop him, I didn't say anything. I want you to know that. I didn't scream. I didn't call him every name I wanted to call him. Something in me went very quiet, very cold, the way the ocean goes still right before a storm rolls in. I turned around and I walked out of that house, and I got into my car and I drove home in complete silence. He thought that silence meant surrender. He had no idea what that silence actually meant. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Grace and I designed that ring together, and I pulled out her photo album, the one with the plastic sleeves that are starting to yellow at the edges. I looked at every photograph of her wearing that ring, her wedding day, laughing under a canopy of string lights, Noah's baptism, her hand resting on his tiny back. On Bella's first birthday, cake smeared on her daughter's face, while Grace beamed with that ring catching the light on her finger. I looked at every single photo, and with each one, the anger inside me grew colder and sharper until it wasn't anger anymore, it was purpose. I thought about the promise I made to her in that hospital room. I thought about her hand in mine, weak but insistent, making sure I understood how important this was to her. I thought about how she trusted me, out of everyone in her life, to be the one who kept that ring safe, and I had failed her, not through my own carelessness, but because I had trusted the wrong man with a key to my daughter's memory, somewhere around 3 in the morning. Sitting alone in my kitchen, with my daughter's photographs spread out in front of me, I made a decision. I said it out loud to an empty house because I needed to hear myself say it. I'm bringing your ring home, Gracie. I don't care what it takes. I didn't know yet how I was going to do it. I didn't know the maze of pawnshops and jewelry stores and legal roadblocks that were waiting for me. All I knew was that I had made a promise to my dying daughter, and I was not going to let a man who called her an old ring's former owner erase that promise out of laziness and greed. The next morning, I started with the obvious place. I drove to every pawnshop within a 20-mile radius of Trevor's house, because I knew he wasn't the kind of man who'd drive across the state to hide a transaction. Men like that are lazy about covering their tracks because they never expect anyone to go looking in the first place. They count on the people around them being too polite, too grieving, too trusting to ask hard questions. I walked into the first pawnshop with a photograph of the ring in my coat pocket, one I had appraised years earlier for insurance purposes, showing the ring clearly, the setting, the stone, everything. I asked the man behind the counter if anything matching that description had come through recently. He looked at the photo for maybe 2 seconds and told me he couldn't discuss the shop's inventory or transaction history with anyone who wasn't the seller or a police officer with a warrant. He wasn't rude about it, just firm, the kind of firm that comes from a man who's had this exact conversation with 100 angry family members before me. I understood his position, but understanding didn't make it any easier to walk back out onto that sidewalk with nothing. I tried 4 more pawnshops that same day. Same answer, different variations of the same wall, privacy laws, store policy. I'm sorry, sir, I really can't help you. That was obstacle number 1, and it hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent 34 years standing in front of classrooms telling teenagers that persistence beats obstacles, that history belongs to the people who refuse to stop looking for the truth. Now I was the one being told, over and over, that the truth wasn't mine to find. I didn't quit. I want you to understand that about me. Quitting has never been in my nature, and it certainly wasn't going to start the week I discovered my son-in-law had sold my daughter's dying wish for pocket money. I went home that night and pulled every piece of paperwork I had. The original appraisal from when Grace and I had the ring designed. The insurance documents I'd filed years ago, listing the stone's carat weight, its clarity grade, the serial number etched into the inside of the band by the jeweler who made it. I hadn't looked at these papers in years, but I kept everything because that's who I am. I am a man who keeps records. 34 years of grading papers and filing lesson plans taught me that documentation is the only thing that survives when memory fails and people lie, armed with that paperwork. I went back out the next day, this time not asking pawnshops to hand over their records, but asking if they could simply confirm yes or no, whether a ring matching this exact serial number and this exact stone description had come through their doors. I wasn't asking for names. I wasn't asking for private transaction details. I was asking one narrow, specific question that most shop owners, once they saw how precise my information was, were willing to answer. That's when I hit obstacle number 2. At the 4th shop I tried that week, a man told me yes, a ring matching that description had come through, but the receipt wasn't on file. Their system had a glitch during a software update the month before, and a batch of transaction records from that period had simply vanished. He was apologetic. He seemed to genuinely feel bad for me, but sympathy doesn't produce paperwork, and I left that shop with confirmation the ring had existed there and nothing else to hold on to. I kept going anyway. There was a strange rhythm that settled into those days, one I hadn't expected. I would wake before sunrise, the way I used to when I had a full day of teaching ahead of me, and I would sit at my kitchen table with a legal pad, mapping out which shops I hadn't tried yet, which routes made the most sense, which questions I needed to ask differently based on what hadn't worked the day before. I treated it like the research projects I used to assign my students: break the problem into pieces, follow every lead no matter how small, and never assume the first answer you get is the final one. Some days I drove 2 hours in one direction only to be turned away at the door. Some days I sat in diners afterward, alone, eating a sandwich I didn't taste, flipping through the photograph of that ring like it might whisper something new to me if I looked at it long enough. My knees ached from all the driving. My back ached from sitting in that truck. But every single morning, I got back in that truck anyway, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept hearing Grace's voice, weak but certain, asking me to keep her Barbies safe. I also spent evenings on the phone with an old friend from my teaching days, a man named Mr. Aldridge, who taught economics down the hall from me for 2 decades before he retired to open his own small antiques appraisal business. He didn't have any direct leads for me, but he understood the world of resale and pawn better than I did, and he walked me through how these transactions typically get logged, what questions carried more weight with shop owners, and how insurance documentation could sometimes unlock doors that a grieving father's plea alone could not. I'm not too proud to admit I needed that help. Grief makes you humble in ways that pride never could. At the 6th shop, I hit obstacle number 3. The owner, a soft-spoken man in his 60s named Mr. Whitfield, looked at my photograph, looked at my paperwork, and told me very gently that a ring matching that description had indeed come through his shop several weeks earlier, and it had already been sold, already gone, purchased by a private buyer, cash transaction, no way for him to track where it went after it left his store. I remember standing in that shop feeling like the floor had opened up beneath me all over again. The ring wasn't just missing. It wasn't sitting in some drawer waiting for me to buy it back with every dollar I had left in my savings account. It was gone, sold to a stranger who had no idea, and frankly no obligation to care, that the ring on their hand carried 3 generations of a family's history and a dying woman's final wish. That was obstacle number 4. Mr. Whitfield told me, as kindly as he could, that the buyer was protected under the law. Once a legitimate sale occurs and the buyer has no knowledge the item was stolen or improperly obtained, the buyer has legal ownership. I could not simply show up and demand the ring back. If I wanted any chance of recovering it, I would need proof, real documented proof, that the ring had been sold without legal right to sell it in the first place. Proof that Trevor never actually owned that ring outright. Proof that it belonged, morally and by explicit instruction, to Grace's children. I sat in my truck outside that pawnshop for a long time that day. I won't lie to you, there was a moment where the exhaustion of it all nearly swallowed me whole. I am 71 years old. My knees ache when it rains. I had spent an entire week driving from shop to shop, absorbing one dead end after another, chasing a piece of jewelry through a system that seemed built specifically to protect people like Trevor and bury people like me. But then I thought about Grace's hand in mine in that hospital room. I thought about her voice, weaker than I'd ever heard it, still finding the strength to make sure her children would have something of hers to hold on to one day. And I thought about Trevor's face when he told me she'd never know, like her memory was disposable the second she stopped breathing. I started the truck. I kept going. Obstacle number 5 came from a place I didn't expect, my own family. Word had gotten around, the way it always does, that I was making a fuss about the ring. My sister called me, her voice full of that particular gentleness people use when they think you've lost your grip on reality. "Stanley," she said, I know how much that ring meant to Grace, but Trevor's going through a hard time. He's raising 2 children alone. Maybe it's time to just let this one go. Let it go. I heard those words from more than one person that week. From my sister. From an old family friend who'd known Grace since she was in diapers. From Trevor's own mother, who called me directly and asked me to stop stirring up trouble for her son. Let it go. As if a promise to a dying woman comes with an expiration date. As if grief gives a man permission to sell whatever he wants of his dead wife's belongings and call it moving on. Nobody seemed to understand, or maybe nobody wanted to understand, that this wasn't about a piece of jewelry. This was about a man who had looked me dead in the eye and said his late wife would never know he'd betrayed the one thing she asked me to protect. And then came obstacle number 6, the one that stung worst of all. Trevor found out I was still digging, still asking questions at pawnshops around town, and he called me himself. His voice was tight with anger, though I noted it wasn't the anger of a guilty man caught. It was the anger of an entitled man being inconvenienced. He accused me of trying to destroy the family. He said I was embarrassing him in front of the community, making him look like a criminal over a piece of jewelry, while he was doing his best to raise his children alone. He told me if I kept this up, I might not be welcome around Noah and Bella anymore. I want you to sit with that threat for a moment, because I certainly had to. This man sold his dead wife's dying wish to fund a trip for another woman, and his response to being questioned about it was to threaten to take my grandchildren away from me. That's the kind of man we're talking about here. That's the level of arrogance we're dealing with. I told him, very calmly, that I would see him at the next family gathering. I hung up the phone before he could say another word. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something, because I've been carrying this question with me since that phone call, and I think about it more than almost anything else in this whole ordeal. If someone betrayed your child's final wish the way Trevor betrayed Grace's, would you let it go? If your own family told you to stop looking, to protect the peace, to let a grieving man keep whatever secrets he needed to keep, would you listen to them? Or would you do exactly what I did and keep digging no matter how many doors got slammed in your face? Tell me honestly in the comments what you would do, because I still don't know if what I did was brave or just plain stubborn. Maybe it was both. Maybe at 71 years old, those two things start to look like the same thing. Now let me tell you what I found next, because it changed everything. I'd been so focused on the ring itself, the pawn shops, the paperwork, the legal roadblocks, that I hadn't stopped to ask the most obvious question of all. Why did Trevor need cash so badly and so suddenly that he was willing to sell his dead wife's wedding ring to get it? The answer came to me almost by accident. Bella, my granddaughter, 6 years old and utterly unaware of the storm swirling around her, mentioned something to me one afternoon while I was watching her and Noah at my house. She was telling me about a woman named Bianca who had come to a birthday party a few weeks earlier, someone she said her daddy called his friend from work. Nothing about that struck me as strange at the time. Children mention names constantly, and most of them mean nothing. But something about the way she said it stuck with me. I started paying closer attention. I noticed Trevor's phone was never far from his hand, always face down on tables, always locked the second I walked into a room. I noticed he'd started dressing differently, more carefully, on days he claimed he was simply running errands. I noticed he'd been working late, with increasing frequency ever since Grace passed, and none of us, grieving, trusting, distracted by our own pain, had ever thought to question it. I did something I'm not proud of, but I don't regret it either. I looked. I searched social media using the name Bella had mentioned, cross-referencing it with the town Trevor worked in, and eventually I found her. A woman in her late 20s, public profile, posting photographs from a resort in Cancun. The dates on those photographs matched, almost to the day, a business trip Trevor had told the family about just 2 weeks after I discovered the ring was missing. I sat at my computer and scrolled through those photographs with my hands shaking. Cocktails by an infinity pool, a private balcony overlooking turquoise water, a photograph of this woman, this stranger, wearing a gold bracelet I did not recognize, captioned with something about gifts from someone special. I pulled every receipt, every bank statement I could legally access as a joint account holder on an old account I'd helped Trevor set up years earlier for the kids' school expenses, an account he'd apparently forgotten I still had partial visibility into. And there it was. Cash withdrawal, May the same week, the pawnshop confirmed the ring had been sold, in an amount that matched almost exactly what a resort trip like that would cost. The money trail led directly from that pawnshop counter to a beach 3,000 miles away, wrapped around the wrist of a woman my daughter never knew existed. Everything clicked into place at once, the way it does when you've been staring at scattered puzzle pieces for weeks and suddenly see the whole picture. This wasn't about money being tight. This wasn't about the kids not needing an old ring. This was about a man who had been living an entire secret life while wearing his grief like a costume for the rest of us, and my daughter's ring had simply become the easiest thing to liquidate when he needed cash for his mistress's vacation. I sat with that discovery for a long time before I did anything with it. I thought about Grace, about how hard she fought, how much she loved her family, how completely she trusted the man she married. And I thought about how he had repaid that trust, not just by moving on, which I could have accepted, which any reasonable grieving father could accept, but by erasing her, by treating her memory like an inconvenience, by taking the one physical piece of her that was meant for her children and turning it into a vacation for a woman he was cheating with. I realized something in that moment that reshaped how I understood this entire situation. The ring wasn't stolen because Trevor needed money. Trevor had a steady job. He wasn't destitute. He didn't sell that ring out of desperation. He sold it because he believed, in his arrogance, that no one would ever challenge him. He believed a dead woman's father was too old, too grieving, too polite to actually fight back. He believed he could erase Grace's memory piece by piece, and nobody would say a word, because everyone around him was too invested in believing he was the devoted widower. This was never just about greed, though the greed was real. It was about disrespect. It was about a man who had decided my daughter's memory could be sold off in pieces to fund a life she never would have tolerated if she'd lived to see it. And it was about erasure, the slow, deliberate erasure of a woman who deserved so much better than to be reduced to an old ring standing in the way of his convenience. I want you to understand something about grief, something I learned in the years after losing both my wife and my daughter. Grief doesn't give people permission to hurt others. It doesn't excuse betrayal, and it certainly doesn't excuse a man laughing in an old widower's face and telling him a dying woman would never know what he'd done to her memory. I decided right then that Trevor was going to know that I knew all of it. And I was going to give him exactly one chance to make it right before I brought the whole thing crashing down on him. But before that meeting, I sat with my own conscience for a few days because I wanted to be certain I wasn't acting out of spite. I'm a man who spent his career telling teenagers that anger clouds judgment, that the historians who let their fury dictate their conclusions always got the story wrong. I did not want to be the wrong kind of historian in my own life. I did not want to be a bitter old man inventing a villain out of grief, so I went back through everything one more time. I looked at the bank records again, line by line, the way I used to grade essays, searching for any explanation that might make this less damning than it appeared. I found none. I looked at the photographs of Bianca in Cancun again, searching for some innocent explanation for the timing, the jewelry, the matching dates. I found none of that either. I looked at Trevor's own words in my memory, over and over. She'd never know, the kids don't need an old ring, searching for some context that might soften them. There was no softening those words. They were exactly as cruel standing alone as they had been the day he said them. I also thought, very seriously, about what this would do to Noah and Bella. I'm not a man who takes lightly the idea of tearing apart the only home those children have left. I lay awake more than one night wrestling with whether exposing their father this way would hurt them more than it would ever help them. In the end, I decided that the greater harm was letting them grow up believing their father's version of events, that their mother's memory was disposable, that promises made to dying women don't matter once the funeral is over. I decided those children deserved to grow up in a family that told the truth, even when the truth was ugly, rather than one built on a lie so smooth it fooled everyone who ever sat at that dinner table. That is the frame of mind I carried into that diner booth. Not rage, not spite, just a tired old man who had run out of gentler options. I asked to meet him privately, away from the children, away from the rest of the family. He agreed, though I could tell from his tone on the phone that he expected another lecture. Another round of me being the difficult old man who couldn't accept his daughter was gone, and life had moved on without her. I sat across from him at a diner on the edge of town, someplace neutral, someplace with enough witnesses around that neither of us would raise our voices. I laid out calmly, Everything I knew, the pawnshop, the dates, the withdrawal. The photographs of Bianca in Cancun wearing jewelry purchased with money that used to be my daughter's wedding ring. I gave him a choice. I told him he could return the ring, buy it back from whoever held it now, no matter the cost. I didn't care if it bankrupted him. Tell the family the truth himself. Apologize to his children someday when they were old enough to understand, and spare all of us the humiliation of dragging this out any further. I told him I would help him find a way to make this right if he was willing to actually make it right. I watched his face while I said all of this, hoping, foolishly perhaps, that some flicker of the man Grace had married still existed underneath all that arrogance. I watched for shame, for guilt, for anything resembling a conscience. Instead, he laughed. He actually laughed at me, the same way he'd laughed in Grace's kitchen weeks earlier, and he leaned back in that diner booth like he had all the power in the world. And he said, "Nobody's going to believe an old man over me." That was the moment the door closed forever. I want you to understand that I gave him a real chance to fix this quietly, privately, with his dignity intact. I gave him a way out that would have protected his children from ever knowing what their father had done. He looked me in the eye and chose arrogance instead. He chose to bet everything on the assumption that a grieving old widower had no power, no credibility, and no fight left in him. I paid for our coffee. I stood up. And I told him very calmly that I would see him at the next family gathering. He had no idea what was coming. I spent the following days building something I hadn't built since I retired from teaching: a case, a file. Documentation, organized the exact way I used to organize lesson plans for 34 years. Everything labeled, everything cross-referenced, everything airtight. I obtained the official pawnshop receipt, the one Mr. Whitfield had on file from before the system glitch, dated and signed with Trevor's own signature confirming he was the seller. I obtained the signed transaction records showing the amount paid, matched almost dollar for dollar against the cash withdrawal from that shared account. I pulled the original appraisal document Grace and I had commissioned years earlier, listing the exact stone, the exact serial number etched into the band, proving beyond any doubt that this was the same ring. I found, tucked away in a box I hadn't opened since the funeral, a card Grace had written to me in her final weeks, her handwriting shaky but legible, reaffirming in her own words what she wanted done with that ring. I don't know why I'd kept that card separate from everything else, some instinct I suppose, but finding it felt like Grace herself was standing beside me, handing me the last piece of proof I needed, and I gathered the photographs. Grace wearing the ring at her wedding, at Noah's baptism, at Bella's first birthday, proof of ownership stretching back nearly a decade, undeniable, unshakable. I laid all of it out on my kitchen table, the same table where this whole story began, and I looked at everything I'd assembled. No emotion left in me by that point, not the raw kind anyway, just facts, just evidence, just the truth sitting there in black and white, waiting for its moment. I decided the next family gathering would be that moment. The following Sunday, the whole family gathered at Trevor's house for what was supposed to be an ordinary dinner. My sister was there. Trevor's mother was there. Aunts, cousins, family friends who'd known Grace her whole life, all sitting around that table making the kind of small talk families make when they don't know a storm is about to break over their heads. I didn't say a word through most of that dinner. I sat quietly, the way I'd been sitting quietly for 2 weeks, letting everyone believe I had finally let it go the way they'd all told me to. When dinner was finishing and the conversation had drifted to something meaningless, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make an announcement. I simply stood up, walked to the head of the table and began placing documents down, one at a time, directly in front of Trevor, the pawnshop receipt, his own signature staring up at him, the bank withdrawal dated the same week, the appraisal document with the matching serial number. The photographs of Grace wearing that ring throughout her entire married life. And finally, Grace's own handwritten card, her wish spelled out in her own failing but determined handwriting. I didn't say a single word while I did it. I let the paper speak for itself. I let 34 years of teaching history do what it always does best, show people the truth in a way they cannot argue with, cannot spin, cannot laugh their way out of. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of people being tactful, the kind of silence that swallows a room whole, where you can hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and somebody's fork clatter against a plate because their hand had started shaking. Trevor stared at the papers in front of him, his face draining of color. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked around the table at the faces staring at him, faces that 20 minutes earlier had been laughing at his jokes and praising what a devoted father he'd become, and he had absolutely nothing to say. I finally spoke, and my voice was steady, quieter than I expected it to be. I told them all that Trevor had sold Grace's wedding ring, the ring she'd asked me with her dying breath to protect for her children, and used the money to send his mistress on a trip to Cancun. I told them I had the receipts, the bank records, the photographs, all of it, and none of it was in dispute. Nobody defended him, not at first, not in that silence. Then the room exploded. Phones started buzzing almost immediately, family members texting each other from across the same table, unable to process what they'd just witnessed fast enough to speak it out loud. Trevor's mother, who had called me just weeks earlier asking me to stop stirring up trouble, sat frozen, staring at her son with an expression I will never forget. The look of a mother realizing, in real time, that the child she raised had become someone she didn't recognize. Voices started rising. Some family members turned on Trevor immediately, demanding an explanation he clearly did not have. Others, to my genuine disbelief, tried to defend him, insisting there must be some misunderstanding, that surely he wouldn't do something like this, even with the evidence sitting directly in front of them. I watched cousins argue with aunts. I watched Trevor's own mother break down in tears, apologizing to me over and over, saying she had no idea, she never would have believed it if she hadn't seen the paper herself. I watched my sister sit in stunned silence, the same sister who had told me to let it go, now staring at the receipt like it might somehow rearrange itself into something less damning. Trevor tried at one point to gather himself enough to speak. He said something about how I had no right to go digging through his private life, how this was none of my business, how I was trying to destroy him in front of everyone. But the fight had already gone out of his voice. Everyone at that table could hear it. The confidence that had let him laugh in my face and tell me she'd never know was gone, replaced by a man realizing, far too late, that he had underestimated exactly the wrong person. I left that house before the shouting had even fully died down. I didn't need to stay for the rest of it. I had done what I came to do. By the time I got home that night, my phone had already started ringing, and it did not stop. 97 missed calls by the time I finally sat down to look at my phone the next morning. Family members, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years, calling to ask if what they'd heard was true. Nobody, in all my years, had expected the truth to come out the way it did. Nobody had expected an old widower to be the one holding all the proof. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and it was total. The ring itself, I'm relieved to tell you, was eventually recovered. With the documentation I'd assembled, the appraisal, the serial number, the clear chain of ownership stretching back to Grace herself, I was able to work with a lawyer to establish rightful legal claim. The private buyer, once shown the full circumstances, agreed to sell it back to me at a fair price rather than risk any legal entanglement. I paid what I needed to pay without a second thought. That ring was coming home no matter what it cost me. Trevor lost far more than a ring, though. He lost the family's trust completely, and trust, once shattered that thoroughly, does not simply repair itself with an apology. He lost his reputation in the community that had once admired his devotion. Word travels fast in small towns, and within a month, there wasn't a family gathering, a church function, or a neighborhood conversation where his name didn't carry a different weight than it used to. His relationship with his mistress, I later learned, ended almost immediately once the affair became public knowledge, and the money trail was laid bare for everyone to see. Whatever fantasy the two of them had built for themselves in Cancun evaporated the moment it required actual accountability. His financial standing took a hit as well, between legal fees, the cost of buying back his own credibility that never quite returned, and the family members who quietly stopped including him in anything requiring shared expenses or trust. But the most important outcome, the one that mattered more to me than watching Trevor's world crumble, was this: the grandchildren's inheritance was protected. Noah and Bella will grow up one day and hold that ring in their hands, and they will know it survived. They will know their mother's wish was honored, even when the man who should have protected it chose to betray it instead. Grace's final wish was kept, not because it was easy, but because I refused to let it be forgotten. Months have passed since that Sunday dinner. Things have settled into a new normal, though I don't think normal is quite the right word for what our family has become. I keep the ring safely stored now, back in that same fireproof safe, and I've started something new since all of this happened. I've begun building memory boxes for each of my grandchildren, small wooden chests I make myself in my workshop, the same workshop that's kept my hands busy since Dory's past. Inside each box, I'm placing photographs of their mother, letters I've written to them explaining who she was, small mementos from her life, and eventually, when they're old enough, that ring will go to Bella, exactly the way Grace asked. Our family relationships have changed permanently, and I won't pretend that part doesn't still ache some nights. Some relatives reconciled with me once the truth came fully into the light. My sister called me in tears, apologizing for ever telling me to let it go, and we've grown closer since then than we've been in years. Trevor's mother and I have found an uneasy peace, bonded by a shared heartbreak over what her son turned out to be capable of, but others have disappeared from my life entirely. A few relatives sided with Trevor even after everything, unwilling to accept that the devoted widower they'd praised for years was capable of something this cold. I've made peace with losing those relationships. I had to. You cannot force people to see the truth if they've decided in advance they don't want to. As for Trevor, I still see him, because I will always be Noah and Bella's grandfather, and I will never let my anger toward him get in the way of showing up for those children the way I've always shown up for them. But something between us is broken permanently, and I don't believe it will ever be repaired. Some things, once you learn them about a person, cannot be unlearned. Despite all of it, the exhaustion, the grief stirred back up, the family fractures that may never fully heal, I have found something close to peace. I kept my promise. I brought my daughter's ring home. And every time I open that safe and see it sitting there, I know that whatever else this ordeal cost me, it was worth it. There is a particular quiet that settles over my workshop these evenings, sawdust drifting in the light from the single bulb overhead, my hands moving over the wood the same way they have for years, and in that quiet, I talk to Grace sometimes. I know how that sounds, an old man talking to a daughter who cannot answer him back, but grief makes its own kind of sense if you let it. I tell her about Noah's grades, about Bella's stubborn streak that reminds me so much of her mother it takes my breath away some days. I tell her the ring is safe. I tell her I am sorry it took me so long to notice something was wrong. Sorry I trusted the wrong man with something so precious. Sorry I could not protect her wish the moment it was threatened instead of 2 weeks after the fact. I do not know if she can hear any of it. I choose to believe she can, because the alternative, that all of this happened in silence, unheard and unanswered, is more than I am willing to accept at 71 years old, with so little time left to spend believing in something softer than that. Noah is older now, old enough that he has started asking harder questions about his mother, about what happened between his father and me, about why some relatives don't come around the way they used to. I have not told him everything. I do not believe children need the full weight of adult betrayal dropped onto their shoulders before they are ready to carry it. But I have told him enough. I have told him his mother loved him more fiercely than almost anything I have ever witnessed in this life, and that some promises are worth fighting for even when the fight is exhausting, even when the people around you tell you to stop, even when you are 71 years old and every bone in your body would rather just rest. Bella still doesn't fully understand, not yet. She asks me sometimes to tell her the story of the ring, and I tell her a version softened just enough for a child her age, about how her mother wanted her to have something beautiful and how her grandfather made sure that happened no matter what stood in the way. Someday, when she is old enough, I will tell her the whole truth, the way I am telling it to you now. I will tell her that her father tried to erase her mother's memory for a woman on a beach who meant nothing to any of us, and that I refuse to let that happen, because some promises do not get to expire just because the person who made them is gone. My daughter trusted me with one promise. I almost lost the ring, but I never lost that promise. Some people think memories can be sold. They can't, because love always leaves a paper trail if you're willing to follow it. I think about that a lot these days. I think about how Trevor believed that once Grace was gone, her wishes went with her into the ground, silent and powerless forever. He was wrong. Grace's love for her children didn't die with her. It lived on in a promise she made me swear to keep, and it lived on in every receipt, every document, every photograph I gathered to prove what he tried to erase. History doesn't disappear just because people stop talking about it. I spent 34 years telling that to teenagers who barely listened. I never expected to spend my 71st year proving it to my own family, in my own daughter's memory, over a ring that a greedy man believed nobody would ever miss. He was wrong about that too. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If someone sold the last gift your child left behind, could you ever forgive them? I still ask myself that question some nights, and I honestly don't have a clean answer. I've made peace with what happened, but peace and forgiveness are not always the same thing. Do you think family betrayal hurts more than betrayal from a stranger? I used to believe a stranger's cruelty would always sting worse, simply because you never expected kindness from them in the first place. I don't believe that anymore. There is nothing that cuts deeper than watching someone you trusted completely decide your grief, your memory, your dying wishes were simply inconvenient to them. And if you were in my shoes, would you have exposed the truth publicly, the way I did, in front of the whole family at that dinner table? Or would you have handled it quietly, privately, away from everyone's eyes? I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. I gave Trevor a private chance to make it right. He laughed in my face and told me nobody would believe an old man over him. I don't regret what happened after that. Not for a single second. Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I read as many as I possibly can, and I mean that sincerely. This story cost me more than I can put into words, and hearing from people who understand why I couldn't let it go means more to me than you probably realize. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story of betrayal, justice, and the kind of family karma that always eventually finds its way home. Grace, if you can hear me somewhere, your ring is home. I kept my promise. I will always keep my promise. And to anyone out there carrying a promise of your own, one made to someone you loved and lost, one the world keeps telling you to let go of, don't. Let them tell you it's over. Let them tell you the dead can't be wronged anymore. Let them tell you an old man or an old woman or whoever you are doesn't have the strength left to fight for it. Prove them wrong the way I did. Some promises are the only inheritance that truly matters, and I will spend whatever years I have left making sure mine was never broken.